Hi there, my name is Troy Parfit, and I'm the author of The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler. In this episode, Jordan Peterson Praising Hitler, Part 1, you should gain insight into how Jordan Peterson warns of fascism or Nazism by lavishing praise on Adolf Hitler and National Socialism, which, as approaches go, is rather unconventional. Long before Jordan Peterson became a pop psych guru who counseled his followers to 1. Become individuals and exude strength by getting organized, and 2. Avoiding the temptations of fascism, these are his two incongruous stated aims, he identified as an expert on evil. Around the year 2000, he told an audience of academics that evil had been his primary area of research. He said, "I've studied evil pretty much my whole life." I assume that his listeners assumed that he was condemning people who participated in evil acts, because that's what nearly everyone would think. However, if you read Peterson's books and listen to his lectures, speeches, and interviews, you'll discover that he almost never does this. As I mentioned in another episode, Peterson's first book, Maps of Meaning, published in 1999, is supposed to be mainly about the Holocaust, yet it barely touches on the subject. There are no descriptions of how the process unfolded, for example, the persecution of the Jews, the passing of anti-Semitic race laws, or the ghettoization and transport to the camps. There are a few primary sources from survivor Viktor Frankl, which Frankl included in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, but they don't tell us much. You would think that a book about the Holocaust would have a variety of primary and secondary sources, but they're conspicuously absent. But then, you would wager that a book about the Holocaust would contain the word Holocaust more than 4 times. Maps of Meaning has no pictures of, say, the Lodz Ghetto or Auschwitz-Birkenau, but it does feature sketches of kings, dragons, castles, and the devil that look as though they belong in a Dungeons & Dragons manual. The volume also contains a bizarre comic strip called The Adventures of Fat Freddy's Cat. You'll excuse me if I don't see the connection between Fat Freddy's Cat and the extermination of millions of innocent people. Indeed, it's difficult to know what kind of book Maps of Meaning is. It is the most disjointed and peculiar book I've ever read. It is beyond strange. Like how Peterson claimed to be an expert on evil, while seldom really analyzing or criticizing evil acts, he typically just touched on the atrocities he said he found so distressing before changing the subject. He claims to be warning of fascism or neo-Nazism without ever actually doing so. To be sure, he tends to reserve his "I'm warning of fascism" claim for when an interviewer has the gall to point out an awkward fact. This is what he did during an interview with the CBC's Wendy Mesley, who asked him why he had posed for a picture with an alt-right hate symbol. Peterson denied he was sending a message to white supremacists and said, "I've been lecturing about the dangers of Nazi totalitarianism for almost 3 decades. I would agree that Jordan Peterson has been lecturing about Nazism for almost 3 decades, but not its dangers. Or at least not its dangers to opponents of fascism." I have a 40-page file on Jordan Peterson that includes almost everything that he said in class or public about Adolf Hitler and other Nazis. Sure, there would be comments I missed, but the most scathing criticism I've heard Peterson make about Hitler was that, quote, "he wasn't exactly a good guy," end quote. Peterson's claims to be warning of Nazism ring hollow when we see him consort with white supremacists like Faith Goldy, Lauren Southern, and Stéphane Molyneux. They seem flimsy when you consider he's never done a lecture just on Hitler, the Holocaust, or the Third Reich. They appear transparent once we realize he's never given a lecture with a title like How to Prevent Genocide or Survivor Accounts from Treblinka. Rather strange given his stated aims, but then Peterson has described himself as, quote, "a very, very strange person," end quote. And he has said that Hitler was, quote, "a very strange person," end quote. Here's something else Peterson has said about Hitler. "One of the things I've always thought about Hitler is that, you know, people, you have to admire Hitler. That's the thing, because he was an organizational genius." What was it that Hitler organized that made him a genius? The war he lost? The Holocaust? When Peterson says, "you have to admire Hitler," what he means is, he admires Hitler, and he's looking for others who admire Hitler too. Now here's Jordan Peterson talking to Brett Weinstein on the Joe Rogan Experience. The discussion about Hitler began with Peterson saying he was reluctant to talk about the dictator because he might, quote, "say something stupid," end quote. After Brett Weinstein, a biologist who's also Jewish, kicked off the discussion by opining that Hitler's racial theory was harebrained, Peterson blew a fuse. Peterson, "I've studied Hitler a lot, and there's a bunch of things that you can't say about him. You can't say he was stupid. You can't say he was without artistic talent. You can't say that he was a poor organizer. You can't say that he wasn't charismatic. you can't say that he didn't do wonders for Germany's economy in the first part of his reign. And so, it's very necessary, if you're dealing intelligently with a true monster, that you give the devil his due. Weinstein: yeah, I think the thing that I saw in your video was, your argument was that when he was losing, instead of putting the genocide on pause and, Peterson: winning the war. Weinstein: and winning, that he ratcheted up the genocide. Peterson: yeah, I don't know if it'd really be, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say it was him who did that, although I think he had a hand in it. It does appear to me to be that's what happened. Note how you can't say he was stupid and you can't say that he was a poor organizer are sort of like, you have to admire Hitler, that's the thing, because he was an organizational genius. Also, despite claiming to be concerned about a Nazi revival, and therefore the potential for another genocide, Peterson only addressed the Holocaust after it was mentioned by Weinstein. Did Peterson say that we needed to educate people so that genocide never happens again? No. In fact, he urges his followers to forgo university because institutes of tertiary learning are crammed to the rafters with Stalinists. Did he cite primary sources from survivors in order to help facilitate an understanding of the nightmare that people endured after being incarcerated and slated for termination because of their culture? On the contrary, he teaches his adherents to abstain from subscribing to quote-unquote victim culture, and in this case, he used the subject of the Holocaust as an opportunity to defend Hitler, who certainly wasn't responsible for the uptick in the butchery. Saying that he was is just so unfair. Moreover, Peterson said Hitler did wonders for Germany's economy, but Germany's economy was a war economy, and the war included the Holocaust. Peterson lauded the first half of Hitler's reign, that is, from 1933 to 1939. Just in the year 1933, Hitler opened the Dachau concentration camp, barred Jews from working as civil servants, established the Gestapo, and stripped Eastern European Jewish immigrants of their German citizenship. However, that Peterson would praise Hitlerite economics is unsurprising, because he seems to think that Hitler was good at nearly everything. 1. Hitler appealed to the darkest fantasies of the crowd, and he was really good at it. 2. Hitler started to reindustrialize the economy, and he was actually pretty damned good at that. 3. Hitler was unbelievably good at letting the crowd tell him what to say. You know, he was a mirror for the crowd, and he was a good orator. I wouldn't call Hitler a good orator. Christopher Hitchens was a good orator. Adolf Hitler was an effective manipulator. Through his crass, divisive, and baleful rhetoric, he persuaded Germans to kill and be killed for a lost cause. He convinced them that they were Aryan superhumans and that non-Aryan subhumans needed to be liquidated. I don't think that can be classified as good. Mind you, you can compliment Hitler and not be a Nazi. So when we're examining speech, it's necessary to consider motivation and what the speaker omits. With that in mind, be aware that, to my knowledge, Peterson has never lauded Churchill or Roosevelt, nor has he ever expressed appreciation for the Allies. However, he becomes giddy when he describes Nuremberg rallies, sounding like a kid at Christmas time. 4. So that's Nuremberg, right? That was the biggest rally grounds ever made in human history. Nuremberg. Hitler was unbelievably good at spectacle. Look how absolutely perfectly ordered that is. God only knows how many people are there. Several 100,000, all in absolutely perfect formation. Note how he called members of the Wehrmacht perfectly ordered, and know that Rule 6 in Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Also know that Hitler once referred to the Third Reich as his house. And whose mugshots preface Rule 6? Those of Karl Panzram, a German-American serial rapist and serial killer upon whom Peterson has also heaped praise. Panzram claimed he killed 21 people, including children. But let's return to Peterson's warning of neo-Nazism by gushing about Hitler's goodness. 5. And Hitler was very good at listening to the German population. 6. Now Hitler didn't really have a fully developed political theory, but he was pretty good at speaking. 7. Certainly what happened to the Germans could be regarded as immensely chaotic. In a society that's collapsed into chaos, you're going to get an unconscious or conscious demand for the imposition of order. And one thing Hitler was good at was order. Note the talk of chaos versus order. The subtitle for 12 Rules for Life is An Antidote to Chaos, and Peterson has said his next book will be called Beyond Mere Order. Chaos was one of many epithets that Hitler used for the Jews. Another was poison, And in Hitler's Zweites book, or second book, Hitler says that the Jewish poison requires an antidote. Now here's Peterson again, gleefully describing a Nuremberg rally. 8. The Nazis were unbelievably good at the use of ritual. 9. So Hitler, he'd stand in front of these incredibly impressive displays of light long before there were rock shows. It was unparalleled in history, and addressed the crowd, and he was very good at addressing the crowd. I wonder if Peterson thinks Hitler should be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. People believe that Jordan Peterson is warning of a resurgence of fascism or Nazism because, 1. That's what he tells them, 2. Many of those people are his followers, and his followers appear to have serious problems, including problems with basic literacy, and 3. What professor and public intellectual in their right mind would ever claim to be warning of a resurgence of fascism or Nazism, but really be stumping for the Fourth Reich? Why, they'd have to be mad. He's lying. As I illustrate in The Devil in His Due, he lies almost all the time. It apparently hasn't occurred to anybody that a professor could also be a chronic liar. While discussing crypto-fascism on the Joe Rogan Experience, during an episode in which Peterson admitted to gifting his father, Walter Peterson, an imitation Nazi war ensign, as a joke, do you get it? He said, I've been identified under many circumstances now with the alt-right, and I've been doing every bit of investigation I can into its many manifestations. It's a very confusing place. He looks to Brett Weinstein. It's certainly not an organized place. For the alt-right to be organized, you would need an organizational genius. And as it happens, Peterson is always going on about the need to be organized, and he has an IQ in excess of 150, or so he says. How lucky for us. The Jordan Peterson phenomenon is a neo-Nazi cult with millions of followers. Fortunately, many of his fans are so thick, they don't understand what their guru is actually trying to signal to them. However, many of them do. Despite Peterson's identity update, he's not a self-help guru, he's a self-harm guru. His present interest is his original interest, evil, which he has studied pretty much his whole life. Thanks for listening, and please hit like and subscribe.